A recurring theme throughout human history has been the concentration of power and privilege in the hands of a few. Whether it manifests in the political dominance of a noble council, the economic hegemony of industrial tycoons, or the influence of modern corporate elites, oligarchy, ruled by the few, has proven remarkably adaptable. From ancient city-states to global superpowers, this system has shaped governance, innovation, and social order. It has driven empires to glory and plunged them into chaos. But what is it about oligarchy that allows it to endure, re-emerge, and evolve despite its inherent inequities? Oligarchy thrives on paradox. It promises stability but often exacerbates division. It can spark innovation while suppressing inclusion. It raises profound questions about the balance of power in societies. Who decides the rules? Who benefits from growth? And who bears the cost of exclusion? These questions, far from abstract, are deeply personal. They touch the very fabric of what it means to live in a just and equitable world. At its core, oligarchy is defined by relationships between rulers and ruled, between wealth and labor, between insiders and outsiders. What do these relationships reveal about the societies that foster them? How do they intertwine with politics, economics, and culture to sustain systems that both uplift and oppress? Most importantly, why do so many oligarchies seem inevitable even as they fail to serve the majority? Our exploration today does not offer simple answers. Instead, it explores the complexity of oligarchy across time and place, tracing how it has shaped civilizations and shaped lives. We invite you to step into each era with us: Sparta's austere militarism, the gilded corridors of the Roman Senate, or the glittering palaces of industrial magnates, and consider the dynamics at play. We shall explore the recurring patterns. How do the affirmed benefits of oligarchy, efficiency, innovation, stability, coexist with its negated costs, exploitation, inequality, and oppression? And what lessons can history teach us about resisting the shadow of oligarchy today? Oligarchy in its many forms is both a story of power and a mirror to our own societies. By understanding its roots and repercussions, we may begin to see pathways to something better, new systems of shared power, equity, and collective flourishing. This journey begins not with answers, but with a question. Why has the rule of the few so often defined the fate of the many? In ancient Sparta, oligarchy thrived through a highly regimented social system carefully controlled by a small circle of aristocrats and elders. Politically, power rested in the dual kingship, two hereditary monarchs, and the Gerousia, a council of elders who were typically selected from noble families. The affirmed influence of this arrangement lay in its stability and ability to deliver swift decision-making, particularly crucial in times of war. Spartans prided themselves on their professional military, revered across the Greek world for its discipline and success. However, the negated influence was the exclusion of the vast majority from civic power. Beyond citizens, the Helot population, enslaved people from conquered territories, lacked even basic rights and endured constant intimidation. Economically, the elite controlled agricultural output and resources, directing wealth to maintain a formidable army. While this system provided a steady base for Spartan expansion and prestige, it also entrenched exploitation. Helots worked the land under severe conditions, facing threats of violence and even ritualistic killings meant to keep them subservient. Over time, this rigid structure stifled economic innovation. Without incentives to improve agriculture or trade, the Spartan economy lagged behind more commercially minded city-states like Athens. Socially, the affirmation lay in the shared warrior ethos. Sparta cultivated a powerful collective identity. Citizens underwent the agoge training, forging a sense of unity and sacrifice. Yet the cost was extreme. Personal freedoms were curtailed, cultural pursuits were limited, and subjugated classes suffered severe oppression. This tension between unity at the top and misery below reveals a critical dynamic of oligarchy. It can marshal communal strength and pride, yet remains heavily dependent on the subjugation or exclusion of a large segment of its population. Sparta's story underscores a recurring theme in oligarchic systems. Consolidating power for a few produces short-term stability, but often at the expense of broader societal well-being. During the Roman Republic, political power was in theory shared across multiple institutions, but in practice, the patrician Senate represented an enduring oligarchy. Politically, the Senate's concentrated authority was seen by many as a bulwark of tradition and stability. The affirmed influence here was the development of sophisticated governance structures, such as consuls, praetors, and checks on power, that helped Rome expand from a city-state into a Mediterranean empire. However, the negated influence was the routine exclusion of plebeians from real decision-making, sparking social friction that simmered for centuries. The conflict of the orders, where plebeians strove for representation, highlighted the tensions born of oligarchic rule. Economically, the patrician class controlled vast estates called latifundia, leveraging conquered lands and slave labor to generate enormous wealth. This enabled Rome to build impressive infrastructure, roads, aqueducts, and forums that benefited trade and troop movements. At the same time, however, smaller farmers found themselves dispossessed of land, increasing migration into urban areas. The concentration of wealth among elites set the stage for frequent economic upheaval, illustrating how economic oligarchy can stifle the middle classes and erode social stability. Socially, Rome's oligarchy fostered a rich cultural milieu for the aristocracy. Patricians financed public games and festivals, ensuring popularity and patronage. This patron-client system, though beneficial for some, entrenched dependency and widened class divisions. The plebeians' incremental gains, such as the establishment of tribunes, were notable affirmations of progress toward broader civic participation. Yet, the continued control by the Senate also underscores the negation. Centuries of inequality that eventually fed the discontent, leading to civil wars. The Roman Republic's ultimate shift to imperial rule under Augustus reveals a sobering truth. When oligarchic interests remain entrenched, even structures designed to prevent autocracy can collapse from within. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Europe fractured into feudal territories, where lords and vassals bound each other in reciprocal agreements. Politically, feudalism was deeply oligarchic. Power rested in the hands of a few noble families, who pledged loyalty to a monarch yet often ruled their lands as quasi-independent domains. The affirmed influence of this system lay in localized governance that could respond to immediate needs, such as defense against invasions or local disputes. Conversely, the negated influence was chronic fragmentation, as nobles frequently challenged the crown, leading to internal wars and persistent instability. Economically, feudal obligations ensured an agrarian-based system. Serfs provided labor on the lord's lands in exchange for protection, and feudal dues underpinned a redistributive economy that, in theory, kept local communities functioning. However, in practice, this structure entrenched severe inequalities. While nobles enjoyed wealth extracted from large estates, serfs remained bound to the land, with few prospects for social mobility. Innovation was suppressed. Without incentives to improve farming techniques or invest in commerce, the feudal economy remained relatively stagnant compared to later mercantile societies. Socially, strict hierarchical divisions dominated everyday life. Feudal lords and knights formed a warrior aristocracy, priding themselves on chivalry and martial prowess, a positive unifying culture for the ruling class. Yet for serfs and peasants, life was arduous and opportunities scant. This stratification led to social tensions, occasionally erupting in revolts like the English Peasants' Revolt of 1381. Over centuries, growing trade networks, the rise of towns, and the emergence of a merchant class eroded feudalism, paving the way for new forms of governance. Still, feudal oligarchy's legacy would reverberate in Europe's future struggles with aristocratic power and social justice. Venice offers a compelling view of a maritime republic dominated by an oligarchy of wealthy merchant families. Politically, the power structure revolved around the Doge, elected for life by the city's elite. The Great Council, populated by patrician families, made decisions on trade, governance, and diplomacy. An affirmed influence of this arrangement was Venice's impressive stability. Transitions of power, though exclusive, were highly regulated, preventing any single family from seizing outright dictatorship. Yet the negated influence became apparent in the Council's notorious closed membership, effectively freezing out new blood and solidifying a caste of hereditary oligarchs. Economically, Venice flourished as a commercial powerhouse. Located at the crossroads of east-west trade routes, Venetian merchants dominated spice and silk trading, building vast fortunes that in turn financed the city's architectural splendor. This success exemplifies how concentrated wealth in an oligarchy can stimulate cultural and infrastructural investment. Simultaneously, strict regulations prevented broader social mobility, and guild members or minor traders found it nearly impossible to ascend to the patrician class. Over time, this rigidity contributed to Venice's stagnation, particularly as European powers shifted their trading focus to the Atlantic. Socially, the Venetian oligarchy championed a strong sense of civic identity. Major festivals, religious pageants, and patronage of the arts fostered a distinct Venetian culture. The state's public works, from the canals to St. Mark's Basilica, showcased collective pride financed by patrician capital. Yet these achievements masked the exclusionary mechanisms that kept the masses politically voiceless. In sum, Venice's story illustrates how an oligarchy can produce remarkable ingenuity and prosperity, yet eventually succumb to internal calcification and external competition, revealing the precarious balance between insular privilege and adaptation to changing times. The Dutch Republic during its Golden Age, roughly the 17th century, provides a fascinating example of an oligarchy fueled by mercantile wealth. Politically, this republic consisted of provincial estates and the States General, with the wealthy merchant class exerting dominant influence. The stadholder, often drawn from the House of Orange, added a quasi-monarchical layer. The affirmed influence was a relatively stable governing framework that encouraged business interests and religious toleration, particularly compared to much of early modern Europe. Nonetheless, the negated influence manifested in the exclusion of most commoners from meaningful political participation, as key offices circulated within a closed circle of patrician families. Economically, the Dutch Republic skyrocketed to prominence through overseas trade, banking, and early financial innovations. Amsterdam's stock exchange was a marvel of the era, and Dutch shipping traversed the globe. Here, the oligarchy excelled at fostering a commercial environment that drew entrepreneurs and capital. However, the emphasis on merchant interests also cemented inequalities. Urban workers and maritime laborers often reaped minimal rewards compared to the magnates controlling trade monopolies like the Dutch East India Company, or VOC. This split in fortunes captures the duality: trade expansion and cultural flowering for some, labor exploitation and precarious livelihoods for others. Socially, the Dutch Golden Age saw a remarkable surge in artistic and scientific achievements, funded by affluent patrons who desired to showcase their sophistication. Master painters like Rembrandt and Vermeer thrived under this system. Simultaneously, marginalized groups such as the rural poor, seafarers, and colonial subjects lived under the thumb of the oligarchy's commercial mandates. Thus, the Dutch experience illustrates both the creative renaissance that an oligarchic structure can fund and the entrenched inequalities it can perpetuate. Over time, internal disputes, economic rivalries, and shifting global power balances would erode this model. But the Dutch Golden Age remains a testament to the intricate relationship between oligarchic power and mercantile success. In the late 19th century United States, the so-called Gilded Age gave rise to industrial oligarchs, magnates like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan, who wielded colossal power. Politically, they influenced legislative processes and electoral campaigns through lobbying and patronage. This produced the affirmed influence of rapid infrastructural and industrial expansion. Railroads crisscrossed the nation, steel built modern cities, and oil fueled unprecedented manufacturing growth. The negated influence, however, was significant corruption, as political machines like Tammany Hall ensured that legislation often served the wealthy at the expense of fair competition and worker protections. Economically, the United States became a global powerhouse by harnessing natural resources and embracing large-scale production methods. Monopolies and trusts dominated markets, showcasing the oligarchs' ability to eliminate competition. Their philanthropic endeavors, such as Carnegie's endowment for libraries and Rockefeller's funding of universities, partially offset public criticism and arguably advanced national education. Yet working conditions for the masses were abysmal. 12-hour shifts, low wages, child labor, and dangerous factories were hallmarks of this era's exploitation. Labor movements, including the Knights of Labor and the American Federation of Labor, rose in opposition, highlighting the simmering social unrest. Socially, grand displays of wealth, opulent mansions, lavish parties, underscored a massive gap between the privileged few and the millions toiling in mines and factories. While the elites could cultivate art, architecture, and scientific research, most Americans contended with overcrowded housing and limited upward mobility. The eventual backlash led to progressive-era reforms, revealing that while oligarchic wealth can spur dramatic economic transformations, it can also galvanize demands for equity. In this interplay between innovation and inequality, the Gilded Age remains a defining case study on how rapid growth often comes with pronounced social costs. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Russia underwent a chaotic transition to a market economy, creating an environment ripe for the rise of oligarchs. Politically, the state shifted from centralized communist rule to a power vacuum, which a select few with the right connections exploited. Through insider deals during privatization, oligarchs acquired control of energy, metals, and other vital industries. This had an affirmed influence in stabilizing certain sectors and ensuring essential services continued. However, the negated influence was pervasive corruption, as political figures and newly minted billionaires formed mutually beneficial alliances that marginalized democratic institutions. Economically, the oligarchs gained extraordinary wealth almost overnight, often purchasing state enterprises at a fraction of their worth. While this injection of private ownership could, in theory, drive efficiency, in practice, it enriched a handful of individuals while millions of citizens saw their savings evaporate amid hyperinflation. Wage arrears and crumbling public welfare systems underscored the stark inequalities embedded in this new order. Internationally, Russia's resources remained attractive, granting oligarchs global clout even as average Russians struggled. Socially, the rapid upheaval shattered many people's sense of security. Unemployment soared, organized crime escalated, and everyday life became fraught with uncertainty. Some oligarchs invested in philanthropic projects or cultural institutions, partly to gain public favor. Yet, distrust ran deep, fueled by conspicuous consumption and the blatant political meddling oligarchs engaged in. Over time, the Kremlin reasserted control, regulating or co-opting the oligarch class. But the structure of Russia's political economy continues to reflect the enduring marks of that 1990s oligarchic scramble. This period underscores how swiftly oligarchy can take root when institutions are weak, and how difficult it is to dismantle once it has formed. Latin America's colonial era, spanning roughly from the 16th to the 19th centuries, established oligarchic rule that left a lasting imprint on the region. Politically, Spanish and Portuguese crowns granted large swathes of land to favored aristocrats, creating an entrenched elite class known as Creoles and Peninsulares. This had an affirmed influence insofar as it imposed a semblance of administrative order across vast territories, with viceroys and audiencias maintaining imperial policies. Yet the negated influence was the exclusion of indigenous peoples, mestizos, and enslaved Africans from meaningful governance. This hierarchical system sowed resentment, periodically erupting in revolts and uprisings. Economically, colonial oligarchies thrived on resource extraction. Silver from Potosi, sugar from the Caribbean, and coffee or cacao in various regions, enriching a small ruling class while draining local environments and labor pools. Plantations and haciendas functioned much like feudal estates, with forced labor systems such as the encomienda. The emergent elites profited immensely, funding sumptuous lifestyles and cathedrals while local communities languished in poverty. These economic structures, geared toward raw exports to Europe, stunted industrial or broad-based development. Socially, colonial society was a rigid caste system. A small group of whites born in Europe or of pure European descent occupied top tiers, while indigenous and African populations faced systemic oppression. However, there was some cultural intermingling, giving rise to distinct Latin American identities and traditions. Even after independence movements swept the continent in the early 19th century, these oligarchic patterns persisted, with landed elites retaining disproportionate power. Understanding colonial Latin America reveals how oligarchy, once entrenched, can perpetuate inequality long after the original colonial power departs, a lesson in the enduring legacies of exclusionary governance. From 1948 to 1994, South Africa was governed under apartheid, a system of institutionalized racial segregation that functioned as a severe form of oligarchy. Politically, the National Party maintained an iron grip, granting the white minority exclusive rights while stripping the black majority of citizenship in their own country. This political arrangement's affirmed influence for the ruling class was systematic control. Legislation like the Population Registration Act and the Group Areas Act ensured they remained at the helm with little dissent from within. The negated influence was egregious human rights violations, global condemnation, and festering internal discontent among the disenfranchised majority. Economically, apartheid privileged white-owned industries, farms, and businesses. Cheap black labor was pivotal to mining, agriculture, and manufacturing, driving profits for a select few. Despite the overall growth in certain sectors, the black majority lived in abject poverty, restricted to homelands or townships with limited economic opportunities. Thus, apartheid exemplified the stark extremes of oligarchic systems: massive benefits for a handful, systematic exclusion and exploitation for the majority. Socially, this entrenchment of inequality permeated every aspect of life, from education and healthcare to housing and freedom of movement. Resistance movements like the African National Congress and global sanctions eventually eroded the regime's power. Yet, the legacy of apartheid remains deeply etched in South Africa's socio-economic fabric. Land ownership, wealth distribution, and racial tensions persist, reflecting the generational damage oligarchic systems can inflict. The fall of apartheid stands as both a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope, illustrating how sustained domestic resistance and international pressure can dismantle even a deeply entrenched oligarchy, though the scars may endure for decades. In the modern era, oligarchy manifests through tech giants and financial elites who wield formidable influence across the globe. Politically, corporations like Google, Apple, Amazon, Meta, Facebook, and others leverage lobbying power to shape regulations, data privacy laws, and even international trade policies. On the affirmed side, their leadership in innovation has revolutionized communication, connected markets, and facilitated rapid information exchange. Yet, the negated aspect arises from the concentration of data and wealth in a handful of corporations. This control over social media, search algorithms, and e-commerce effectively curtails competition and can even sway political narratives. Economically, these tech titans have catapulted entire industries forward, creating billions of dollars of market value and offering new avenues for entrepreneurship. Digital platforms enable small businesses to reach global audiences, and cutting-edge research drives advancements in AI, biotech, and beyond. Simultaneously, critics highlight exploitative labor practices, from warehouse workers on tight quotas to gig economy drivers lacking benefits, and the mounting monopolistic tendencies of large firms. Economic oligarchy thus merges with technology, magnifying wealth disparity as a small cadre of billionaire founders and investors amass immense fortunes. Socially, the impact is profound. On the positive side, unprecedented access to information has democratized knowledge in some respects and spurred social movements. However, issues like algorithmic bias, misinformation, and erosion of privacy illustrate the darker side of corporate concentration. Communities and individuals often find themselves at the mercy of opaque platforms that shape public discourse. The tech oligarchy's emergence highlights an enduring pattern in human societies, a few powerful entities harnessing the era's most transformative resources, once land, then industry, now data, consolidate power, reap outsized benefits, and impose systems that can either uplift or oppress many. In this delicate balance lies our contemporary struggle, how to preserve innovation and global connectivity while preventing oligarchic excess that undermines democracy and broad-based prosperity. The story of oligarchy is in many ways the story of human societies, their aspirations, their limitations, and their enduring struggles for equity and justice. Across eras, from the militaristic order of Sparta to the sprawling empires of Rome, from feudal hierarchies to modern corporate boardrooms, oligarchies have provided stability and driven innovation. Yet they have also entrenched exclusion, inequality, and oppression. As we reflect on the patterns and insights woven through this book, three central interrelated themes emerge, each carrying lessons that resonate powerfully in the present. Oligarchies persist because they are adept at creating the appearance of control, stability, and progress. They marshal resources to achieve monumental feats, whether building the aqueducts of Rome or funding the digital infrastructure of today's tech empires. These systems often emerge in times of uncertainty, when a centralized authority seems the only antidote to chaos. However, this stability is precarious. The bargain that sustains it depends on the consent, or at least the acquiescence, of the excluded majority. History teaches us that this consent can fray, often explosively. The Spartans relied on the labor of the helots. The Romans leaned on the plebeians and their tribunes. Colonial empires extracted wealth from subjugated peoples. Each system seemed unshakable until it wasn't. As exclusion widens and benefits concentrate further, resentment builds, eventually fueling movements for reform or revolution. The lesson here is clear. Societies built on concentrated power may achieve remarkable short-term successes, but their longevity depends on fostering a sense of shared purpose and equity. Without it, no oligarchy can endure indefinitely. Oligarchies often claim the mantle of progress. They channel resources into advancing technology, building infrastructure, and funding culture. From the Venetian merchants financing Renaissance art to today's tech titans pioneering artificial intelligence, their ability to direct wealth toward transformative projects is undeniable. Yet the cost of this progress is frequently borne by those who reap the fewest benefits. The exploited helots of Sparta, the overworked laborers of the Gilded Age, and the data-mined users of modern tech platforms all share a common fate. They enable progress for the few while remaining trapped in systems of inequality. The central paradox of oligarchic innovation is that it both enriches and impoverishes. The challenge then is to untangle these dynamics. Can societies create systems where progress is shared, where innovation uplifts rather than excludes? This is not merely a historical question, but a contemporary one. It forces us to confront how wealth is distributed, how labor is valued, and how the structures of power that govern innovation can be democratized. Perhaps the most hopeful theme in the history of oligarchy is the persistence of resistance. Despite their entrenched power, no oligarchy has ever been immune to challenge. From the plebeian strikes in the Roman Republic to labor movements in industrializing nations, from anti-apartheid struggles in South Africa to modern calls for corporate accountability, history is rich with examples of the excluded demanding and achieving change. Resistance is a reminder that while oligarchies may define eras, they do not define human destiny. However, resistance alone is not enough. It must be accompanied by thoughtful reform. Revolutions often dismantle oligarchies only to see new ones rise in their place. The enduring challenge is to design systems that are resistant to the concentration of power, systems that prioritize inclusion, equity, and accountability. This requires vigilance, adaptability, and a commitment to redistributing not only resources, but also the ability to shape society's rules and direction. The lessons of oligarchy are not confined to history. They resonate today in debates about wealth inequality, corporate monopolies, and political disenfranchisement. As we grapple with these challenges, we are faced with a choice: to allow the cycles of concentration and exclusion to continue, or to imagine and build systems that break free of them. Breaking these cycles requires effort at every level: individuals questioning the systems they participate in, communities advocating for fairness, and institutions committing to transparency and inclusion. It means fostering a culture that values equity over expedience, collaboration over control. Above all, it requires recognizing that power, when shared, is not diluted but strengthened, capable of building societies that thrive not for the few but for all. The history of oligarchy offers warnings, but it also offers hope. It shows us that no system is immutable, no structure unassailable. With reflection, determination, and collective action, we can forge a future that does not repeat the mistakes of the past. Let this be the beginning of that journey.